In today's mega important video, no Trump intended, we're talking about, of course, the interview, Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. We're going to show you why this interview was historic, what it revealed about the masses, what it revealed about the politics of the world, what it revealed about the fate of the United States and humanity as a whole, what's going to happen to Ukraine, and why we are still idiots as a population. So stick with me. This is food for thought. Let's roll. What up, everybody? Food for thought here. NazareN is here. Prove to me that you're alive is here. Of course, this video again is not scripted because I don't want to sound like a robot just reading off a screen. I want to be able to have a conversation with you, but of course, I don't want to be too boring. We're talking about the Tucker Carlson, Vladimir Putin, or vice versa interview and why this was a super important historic moment. We're gonna look at it, as mentioned in the intro, from a different point of view. There were moments that were left out, either purposely or intentionally. There were things that were not translated. Now, you could say that there is no such thing as a literal translation, but what I'm talking about is certain things that were not translated what looks like on purpose. And I want to present this video as this interview went with a background story so you can understand better what is really going on. And again, why do I have the authority to speak on it? Because I'm from Western Ukraine originally. I grew up in America, traveled all around. I've seen the world. I've studied the world ever since I was a little kid in multiple languages. So it's not an authority thing, but it's more of a opinion thing. I don't know how many of you watched this interview. It was a 2-hour interview. Of course, the Western mass media went into a frenzy when they found out that this interview was going to happen, which, to a regular folk could be like, yeah, because they don't want stuff to be revealed. And liberals are like, no, how could you go and take an interview from this disgusting human being? This video will reveal why we are still very much being manipulated on both sides of the spectrum. And this is very important. I really want you to know, and I want to stress to you, why Russia is almost at a obsession point with Vladimir Putin. To us in the West, there's little that we know about Russia. People think of Soviet Union and then the collapse, then another. But in the minds of the Western masses, nothing has changed. This boogeyman of Russia, which used to be a Soviet Union, this crazy guy with nuclear weapons, is out there, and they're attacking now other countries, and they have this leader that's almost Hitler and Stalin like, and we don't know what's going on. And I mean, obviously, to the conservative side, people are starting to wake up and see that maybe things are not as we're being told on CNN and BBC, etc., etc. But I really want to stress this to you. To someone that lived through the collapse of the Soviet Union, I was a little kid, but I remember everything vividly. And from someone that lived through the post-Soviet Union perestroika collapse, I know exactly what was going on in Ukraine, but the same thing was going on in all the post-Soviet Union countries. It was all the same. And what was happening is total dismay. and I'm putting it lightly. The class that started ruling was the Rocketeers. They organized these gangs, if you will, organized into these racketeering groups. And what they would do is, I mean, they would run things as prostitution, but what they made their money most off was they would do what's called extortion, but in Russia or in Ukraine, we would call it krishuje. So what they would do is they would come to newly formed businesses. It could be a restaurant, it could be even a stand at a bazaar, at a market, and they would say, "Look, I'm going to give you protection. And every week my guy is going to come and you have to give him a percentage of whatever you make." And if people didn't pay up, their businesses got, demolished and ran through. And was there anyone to be protected from? Who knows? But they set the rules. And I left Ukraine in 96. And what eventually happened, again, in Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Belarus, it was the same thing, is that these former racketeers that were high-ranked racketeers, they became the new multimillionaires and even billionaires, which in turn made them into oligarchs. Now, if you know what an oligarch means, it's not just some, rich guy, running things. An oligarch means a rich guy that has influence on the political spectrum in the country. And that's exactly what happened in Russia and in Ukraine, where there was no middle class. It was the lower class, and all these former bandits and gangsters and racketeers that were now oligarchs, that were now pulling the strings, if you will, in the country. And of course, what happened was, predominantly in Ukraine, but in Russia also, they started selling everything at a super cheap price to the West. We're talking weapons, we're talking resources, like a lot of things. So things were so bad in the 90s in Russia and in Ukraine. We call it Likhie 90, which is, well, how would you translate it? Like a terrible 90s. Things were so bad. The wages, if you will, were around, in Ukraine, I know, were around $30 a month. A person was making $30 a month, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that people working at a factory or any kind of normal job, they wouldn't get paid for months on end. And when they finally got paid, they would get paid with things like, no joke, like toilet paper or like latex gloves, medicinal coats. I've actually seen these things. Imagine a person works for 2-3 months not getting paid, and then a bunch of toilet paper is presented to him like, here you go. Which actually, toilet paper was a super high commodity when I was a kid. We used to, instead of using the toilet paper, we would use book pages. What we would do is we would crumble them up, but that's a whole other story. So in the early 2000s, when Vladimir Putin came into power, it seems that Russia started drifting away from that oligarchy rule of power, while countries like Ukraine stayed in it. Now, I talked to someone that pretty much knows things, someone from Russia, and I asked them directly. I'm like, look, there's a reason why Boris Yeltsin, Abramovich, which was the owner of Chelsea, maybe he's still the owner of Chelsea in UK, and Putin got rich. There were just train full of resources that were disappearing. We're talking oil, we're talking gold, we're talking diamonds. All these trains were disappearing overnight. And we knew that Putin was one of these guys that was getting rich off resources disappearing from Russia overnight. And it was lumber, it was all kinds of things. Anything that could go went. And this guy just recently, a couple years ago, he's telling me, look, yeah, Putin was one of these guys. He was just like Abramovich. He was just like Boris Yeltsin. They were stealing at a super high rate. But something happened within the Putin cabinet and close-knit people around him where Russia started to climb out of that oligarchy situation, and regular people in fact started living better, and each year it was getting better and better and better, while there was endless turmoil in Ukraine. First the Orange Revolution, Oranževa Revolucija, in the 2004. There was always political disputes between presidents, so on and so forth, and then the government overthrow in 2014. While this was happening in Ukraine and presidents were coming and going, and us as Ukrainians were like, yeah, look, at least we have presidents coming and going. But in Russia, the financial situation was climbing up. It was headed towards embetterment, and the population was seeing this. Just imagine people that survived the terrible 90s, the dismay, the total destruction, corruption at enormous, like, I can't even explain to you. You could literally be pulled over by a cop and give him a couple of dollars and be let go. Doesn't matter what you did. People were getting away with murder, literally. And imagine people that seen the country in that state all of a sudden are seeing improvements. All of a sudden they're seeing a middle class emerge. All of a sudden they're seeing people coming from Ukraine over to Russia to work. You know, people, just imagine people go from Ukraine going to America or Western Europe. America was far-fetched. Like, you really had to be lucky to get to America. But imagine, you know, people were going to Poland and such things to work in the fields from Ukraine, but they were also traveling to Russia because there was opportunities in Russia to make money. So the population, again, which are the majority of the voters in Russia, they seen this with their own eyes. And again, it was a steady growth, and the growth is continuing until today. Putin himself mentions in the interview with Tucker Carlson, while Russia is under the most sanctions in history, they were able to be the #1 economy in Europe in 2023. So people are seeing this. Even more than that, people are living through this. So of course, they're obsessed with Vladimir Putin. They're actually paranoid. They're afraid. I talk to Russians all the time, almost on a daily basis, definitely on once a week kind of basis, because I have another show in Russian. So I talk to Russians. They're almost paranoid into thinking what will happen to us if, God forbid, Putin is not around tomorrow. So this is why when Putin went into, I shouldn't say Putin, but Russia went into Ukraine, obviously everyone supported. But Slavic people, which is the majority population of in Russia, were such people that we're most likely going to defend what we think is right. And Russians and Russia feel like they are on the right side of history. And if we would look at the world the way it is presented to us, we could definitely say that Russia is on the right side of history. But as you and I know, people that watch these kind of videos, there are hidden things from us, so to speak, and that's what we're here to talk about. So just imagine a regular folk in Russia that was completely beat up by the 90s now is having a leader that's a patriot. So of course they're going to support him. They want him to stick around for as long as possible. Matter of fact, if I ask Russians what will happen after Putin, they're like, we're pretty sure that Putin is preparing someone else. let's now go into the interview. Obviously, for free media, for people like myself and people like Russell Brand and Tucker Carlson and us, that people that call themselves free media, this was a very, very, very important moment. As I'm watching this interview, I watched it first directly from tuckercarlson.com, where it was a English translation, and then I watched it from a Russian channel where Vladimir Putin was not translated. He was speaking in Russian, and Tucker Carlson in return was translated. There were things, first of all, the way, the energy that Vladimir Putin was speaking with was not presented the right way in the English translation. The English translation was kind of dull. There was no sort of, pitch of the voice either going up or down. It was just plain. And while you think that's insignificant, I think that is very significant, because when I watched it in original, Putin was very vocal. He was like very loud. He was very lenient in presenting what he wanted to present. What happened in the interview, and why I think that on a grander scale, we're being lied to once again. We're being bamboozled once again. No matter how much I wish for Putin to be like, and again, I'm from Western Ukraine, but as much as, the conservative world and I would want, like, for globally, for there to be a figure like Putin that's going against the global elite and against the agenda, and I hate to disappoint you, but that's not the case. And this interview actually proved to me that's not the case. When Putin went into the history of Russia and Ukraine, which Ukraine is part of the Russian history, I was sitting back and I was thinking to myself, is he going to talk about what we call the Norman theory or side of the Russian history, or will he talk about the Russian theory of the Russian history? And this is extremely important. You might think it's just insignificant, because the what we call Normanska teoria, or the Norman theory, is what's accepted globally. You and I know that we can't trust history. We cannot trust what we're being presented with as far as history. And when I was listening to Vladimir Putin, and historically, let's say it's true, Novgorod formed, Oleg and Prince Oleg and his little son Igor went into Kiev. They overthrew Askold and Dir. They took over Kiev, so they formed this statehood, Rus, which later was named by the historical time Kievan Rus. He talks about the Golden Horde attacking Rus and invading and demolishing cities, and this is how Rus got divided, so on and so forth. Novgorod being the only city that maintained sovereignty. Russia, I think, and just the territory of the Russian steppes now shows that they have the most historic monuments. So anyone that wants to study that region can very well go and study that region. But history overall has been accepted by the world community, and it doesn't change very much. So we're getting evidence now from the city of Novgorod that in fact Rus at the time, and in particular the city of Novgorod, they weren't defending themselves from the east, meaning from Mongolia or Asia. They were in fact defending themselves from the west. The evidence is showing that the Golden Horde was in fact coming from the west. And when Putin started talking about Genghis Khan, if you Google images, Genghis Khan, we're all, used to thinking of him as a, Mongolian features and Asiatic features. But if you Google and put on images and scroll down, you will notice that there's a portrait of Genghis Khan, and he's not Asiatic at all. I'm gonna pull it up right here, or right here. You guys can see, but you can Google this yourself. And he goes on into history, and he touches on Catherine the Great, the Russian Revolution, or we call it October Revolution. And then he jumps into, briefly into World War I, and then obviously World War II, which was a big event. One thing that Putin never mentions is that for some reason, for some unknown or known reason, Russia was, or in particular Moscow, was called the Third Rome. He never mentions at this interview, I don't know if it was a place for that, it wasn't a place for that, but if you're talking about history and you're fighting against the global elite, why are you not mentioning such an important fact? Why also didn't you mention that when Rus was baptized, it wasn't just Prince, Vladimir the Great came and just baptized, and everyone was like, yeah, cool, we're Orthodox Christians now, which actually what we call pravoslavia and orthodoxy are actually two different things. But let's just stick to the story. So Rus was baptized by Greek Orthodoxy, right? By Byzantine Orthodoxy. Putin didn't mention that the population, the Slavs, the Rus people at the time, they did not take very happily and lightly to that fact. There was a lot of bloodshed. He didn't mention this. This is extremely important. And then again, he doesn't mention that for some reason, Moscow was considered to be the Third Rome. And ever since the moment Moscow was considered to be the Third Rome, Russia, which Ukraine also is a part of, never had ethnic Russian leaders. You can look at the Romanov dynasty. They weren't Russian. Catherine the Great was not Russian. There's this whole big conspiracy, if you will, of Peter the First going to the Netherlands for 2 years and coming back like a different person. He actually ordered the population, the men population, to cut off their beards, which in Rus and to Slavic people was a sacred thing. But I think that this fact, if we're looking at actual history, is extremely important. That Russia, the Russian Empire, later Russian Empire, was never ran by ethnic Russians. The Romanov dynasty was of Germanic background. Catherine the Great's name is not Catherine the Great. It's Sophia Augusta something. And this is extremely important. And if we're talking about the Russian Revolution, why wasn't it mentioned that Tsar Nikolai II and King George VI were cousins? And not only, I'm going to pull up the picture again. I talked about this before. Here you can see in this picture, not only are they cousins, they look very, 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 very alike. They almost look like they're twins. Now, can this happen amongst cousins? It can, but that's just way too weird. So what I'm getting to is, if we're meant to believe that there are these opposing powers, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth versus Russia, later the West, it's constantly the West versus Russia. Why are these things not mentioned, that Russia was actually ran by Western leaders all the way up to the Russian Revolution? And even during the Russian Revolution, Lenin and Stalin himself have lived and studied in Switzerland and in Germany. Lenin was a product of Germany. right around the time when Karl Marx supposedly by himself comes up with the manifesto, the Communist Manifesto. And it got me thinking, why is this not mentioned? If you're truly going against the establishment, then you should in fact know these things. Of course he knows these things. Why were Russia's first prominent historians also German? Bayern, Mueller, Miller, I think, were Germans ordered by Catherine the Great, again, Sophia Augusta, to write the history of Russia, while there were prominent historians of Russia that were ethnic Russians like Lomonosov. And Lomonosov was always leaning towards the Russian Slavic theory side of history, which they differ. And this is extremely important. Again, Moscow becoming and being called the Third Rome, while we're always meant to think that the Western Roman Byzantine world and Russia are opposing powers. Why did Russia all of a sudden adopt the two-headed eagle, which again is Roman symbolism? Let's say fine, let's say the same power was running both the Great Britain Empire, the Russian Empire. I mean, obviously these two, Tsar Nikolai II and King George VI were cousins. And fine, let's say, one entity was running the world at that time, and now we're finally truly getting multipolar world, and now there's this, good side fighting against the hidden golden billion elite. Why is he not mentioning any of this? So it got me thinking. And by the way, I want to mention before I go on that one thing that wasn't translated about what Putin said was that NATO will not be dismantled and Russia wasn't accepted into NATO because they have to keep producing weapons, and so you have to keep the population of the United States afraid, and this is how you get into the population's pockets and they pay taxes because they're like, look, we have to protect ourselves. And it's a good scare tactic, but I don't understand why out of all the things that wasn't translated. Putin said it in Russian. I never heard it translated in English. With me studying the world, it's obvious that we have been lied to continuously about the history of the world, perhaps even the shape of the world. Again, I don't want to sound like a flat earther, but there's a reason why these groups of people are emerging. And no, it's not because, these people want to feel special and so on and so forth, so they form these groups. There's a reason why in this particular historic moment, with all this information available, there are people that are claiming the world is flat because they're tired of believing the nonsense of the ruling class. And I always used to think that there were two opposing parties, literally in the world's history, always competing against one another. But later on, I learned that these opposing parties were purposely created to keep us always at a paranoia, to keep us always fighting, always at war. And this is not going to stop. This is only getting worse and worse. And for some reason, there's always something happening like almost every 100 years in history. There was obviously World War II, World War One, which was, a major thing was World War II. Colossal losses as far as human lives. Then Napoleon in the 1800s, and something happened in 1812. And because of that happening, I'm pretty sure you don't know your ancestors past the second or third generation, maybe the fourth generation, but that's about it. And the only way you can find out is going on ancestors.com. And how can you for sure say that that's what's going on? So with all these evidence appearing in our lifetime, I am convinced that just like there was a Soviet Union, a communist, socialist country, there was an opposing democratic capitalist United States. I just want you to think about this. There were dynasties, families going back all the way to the Egyptian days that were accumulating power globally, from Mesopotamia to Egypt to Byzantine, Roman Empire. Then it split into Russian Empire, British Empire. Just think about, these people are the only people in our world right now that know their lineage for 10 generations, and they accumulated power over resources throughout all these centuries, to the point where they don't care about resources anymore. They have their own hidden agenda. And again, while I would wish for Putin to be against the establishment, he's too little of a person. And when we're always think, okay, so maybe there's these trillionaires like Rockefeller and all these other people above presidents and such. But even those people are a rank lower than the people that are truly running things. You think communism just appeared out of Karl Marx's brain, or fascism came from Italy, or the idea of master race came from Hitler? If you closely study these things, these are very well devised social psychologies that were implemented into the masses. I don't want to make this video too long, so there is a point that I'm getting into, but I just want to ask, before I get into the next point, I just want to ask you a question. Do you really think, we're thinking of presidents as leaders, as people that are running the country. Do you really think that this dude or this dude is running the country, man? Do we really think that? Or do we really think that we're actually voting for someone when we're always getting like two choices? Here, vote for this guy, crazy dude, or vote for this even crazier dude. But if you do study the Kabbalah, it's a book of rituals, but in the Kabbalah it states that in order to lie to the population, you have to present things to them as it is. It has to seem like you didn't make the population do what you want them to do. They have to willingly make these choices. But I just want to give you a quick example. And this is gonna sound ridiculous, but this is checkable things. You can check these things. Vladimir Zelensky, it's not Volodymyr Zelensky, it's Vladimir Zelensky, is a Russian-speaking Jewish guy from Eastern Ukraine, spoke Russian his whole life. He was an actor for someone that had a huge production company in Ukraine, Kolomoisky. Now, Kolomoisky is one of these oligarchs that emerged from the 90s, just stole a whole bunch of resources, sold them, built banks, got a whole bunch of citizenships all around the world, even though in Ukraine it's illegal, but who cares? So in 2016 and 17 and 18, what Kolomoisky decides to do is to shoot a show about a regular, hardworking, normal teacher of a man. I believe the character's name was Koloborodko, something like that, which Zelensky played the main role. He played the role of a teacher that becomes president, called the servant of the people, where a regular person, a regular teacher, becomes the president of Ukraine, and he's this super just president. But in the show, in the series, they show us that this president wants close ties with NATO, which in turn causes a war. Again, this was back in 2016-17. You can go back and check what I'm saying. A war happens in Ukraine, which then divides Ukraine into smaller states. I really want for this to sink in. Anytime I talk to my fellow Ukrainians, I ask them, I'm like, did you see this show? Like, are you not registering that maybe something is going? So just what I'm trying to say is, just imagine how flat out they do these things in Ukraine, because the Ukrainian people are desperate. We've been beat up for centuries, man. Ruled over, conquered, beat up. And this goes for the Russian people, because in fact Ukrainians are ethnically Russians. The whole idea of Ukrainian emerged in the late 1900s. The concept of a nationality emerged in the 19th century. I want that to sink in. So do you really think that going back in history, these dynasties that accumulated territories and resources are letting us have free elections? These borders that were outlined in the world, they constantly change anyway. Great Britain had all these colonies. There was West and East Germany. There was Soviet Union. Before that, the Russian Empire. Before Russian Empire, Rus, which Putin didn't mention. Scythia was there, which were the same people. Scythians didn't just disappear and then Russians appeared out of nowhere. But yet, they want you to believe all of these borders and outlines while they don't follow them themselves. So just like the Zelensky example that I brought up, this is happening globally. And sadly, what happens is that these people that we call free media, in turn, turn into controlled opposition, knowingly or unknowingly. Alex Jones, controlled opposition. David Icke, with his crazy theories, controlled opposition. Even though, who knows, maybe there are reptilians, right? But he's controlled opposition, because one side of the world is going, oh, this guy is nuts, while the other side is being afraid, like, oh my God, reptilians, they know what they're doing. Russell Brand accumulated all of these followers. He's becoming controlled opposition. You might not know about it. Tucker Carlson, he might have good intentions, but yet he's becoming controlled opposition without knowing, because the people that truly run things and control the resources, they have been studying us and controlling us for centuries. Have scientists working on this. When Putin started talking about Elon Musk and the implementing a chip inside a human being's brain. And there was a reason why Tucker Carlson asked Putin about the AI and AI taking over. They want us to be afraid. They have to keep us controlled by any means necessary, man. And what I think is happening right now, and I'm getting to my final point, is because if you look at history, there was Mesopotamia, the great Egyptian Empire, Byzantine Empire, Roman Empire. Obviously, there were, different Arabic empires, Russian, Great Britain Empire. And then United States emerged as this global superpower. With all of these migrants running across the border, now even fighting with police officers in New York City, with Texas talking about they're going to take up arms, and of a possibility of a civil war happening, 70,000 people dying from fentanyl overdose, with cities being overran by homeless people because the mental state of the American people are just crumbling. Americans are being internally devastated. With all of these things happening, it looks like, and finally Tucker Carlson going to interview Vladimir Putin, and the mass media is like, oh my God, what's happening? Everyone is talking about it. What I really think is happening, they're finally flushing out United States, and they're going to create another center, another great power, and most likely that will be Russia, while Ukraine is going to be the new Israel. And this is why they're killing off the population. A lot of people running to be servants in Europe. But I think that in the near future, United States and Europe are going to collapse. While we're out here arguing about nationalities and races and borders and all of this, to them, it doesn't matter if you're Scottish, white, or Arabian black or whatever. To them, we're just statistics. We're numbers. While we're thinking, oh my God, I'm patriotic to Germany, and Germany part of the European Union, to them it's like borders don't exist. They only exist to us. These ideas of nationality and flags and national anthems and symbols, they only exist to us. This is the way we are being controlled. To them, they don't care. So they're going to flush down the toilet the United States. They're going to flush down the toilet Europe. They're going to set up most likely their center in Russia. And wars are going to keep happening. We keep screaming and paranoia about World War III, World War III, World War III. World War III's been happening. There's about 50 conflict zones right now in the world where people are dying. Hunger still exists on a mass scale. It's only increasing. Pandemics now they have a new thing, a global pandemic. They're going to either lock you in a house or you're going to die of paranoia, while something completely different might be affecting you. And if you ask me, there's a reason why real history's been hidden from us. There's a reason why you only know about 3 generations of your family tree. Because I believe that there was a time where human beings lived organized in a way where global wars were not happening, even though they want to tell us that humanity always needs to be in a war. I don't think so. There's evidence to show that before these dynasties and structures started to seize this global power, there was a time where the population was living in harmony with the planet that we're on, and they were being prosperous in their own way. And I think the only way to do that is to get rid of these ideas and borders called countries, and to live like the way, I don't know, but like people lived back then. The evidence showed that people lived in smaller communities. They were responsible for those smaller communities. But as soon as you outline these countries, it's easier to manipulate us and control us. Give you a national anthem, give you a nationality, give you again a coat of arms, give you colors, give you tradition. And all of a sudden you're looking at someone that's just like you. You're looking at him as someone alien, man. It's exactly what happened to Ukraine and Russia. In Ukraine, there are posters right now, billboards in the middle of the street. Kids are seeing this and everything, where on one side they have these orcs, literally orcs, fighting the Ukrainian army, man. Think about this. So when those soldiers, which are exactly the same as the soldiers on the other side, they're going to fight not a fellow human being or even a fellow Russian, they're going to fight an orc, man. And don't even get me started on the drugs that are involved on the front line. I could do this to Texas right now. And people that once, not too long ago, called themselves Americans could now be calling themselves Texans. Again, this happens. There was a Czechoslovakia. All of a sudden, it's Czech Republic and Slovakia. There was a Yugoslavia that divided into all these different states, Soviet Union, and this repeatedly happens throughout history. While what they do is they find new ways to control us because of the information that gets available to us. So they have to kind of keep up with the times and come up with new ways in order to control us. So once again, I don't want to make this video extremely long. I'll wrap up with this. Most likely there isn't one Vladimir Putin. Most likely what I call exists is the idea of Putin, an idea that saved Russia. And now this idea is being presented to the global South as someone that could possibly go against the establishment and save them as well. And I can see why. The guy can sit down for 3 hours and talk nonstop, talk facts, and seems sincere and honest. I just want you to think about this. Go back in history and see why is there every 100 years some global event happens. What exactly happened to cities around the world in 1812? Why history is iffy. Again, the example with Genghis Khan. I want you to look at it, to study it closer. But I really want you to remember one thing that I always keep stressing on this channel, is that we are the ones that have the power. So whenever we decide to put a stop to it is when it will stop. I want to shout out the greatest poet of all time, my beautiful Romaniya poet, a book, A Journey Inside. This amazing poetry book is out now on Amazon. I'll leave the link in the description. My brother Jim Dillinger, his channel, I'll leave the link in the description. Also a lot of cool information. So with that being said, this interview, Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, was just, in my opinion, just another ploy to get some of us hopeful, to get some other people more paranoid, to get the third kind of people still guessing, so on and so forth. Nothing is really changing while people are really dying. People are really hungry. Countries, populations are devastated, man. we keep spending our lifetimes to work to supply them with more resources to create more weapons to destroy us better and faster. And now AI approaching. So what's next? Will they truly keep this golden billion and have a little population serving them, and the rest will have AI serve? I don't know. But I want you to question these things. Again, these videos are never scripted, so I hope I wasn't all over the place. But if I was, oh well. Listen, this was food for thought. I love all of y'all. We're coming back with a lot of videos. There's a lot of projects going on, a lot of stuff going on. Again, check out Romaniya Poet, A Journey Inside. Check out Jim Dillinger. Links are in the description. And write me a comment. Let's talk. All right? Uno.